There are places where the world we know grows thin, where the reassuring hum of modern life fades into an older, deeper silence. These are the borderlands, found not on any map, but felt in the soul. It might be a stretch of ancient forest, where the trees stand too close together, and the canopy overhead blots out the sun, leaving the floor in a perpetual state of twilight. It could be a remote, mist-shrouded hillside, where great stones, older than memory, rise from the earth like the bones of forgotten giants. Or it might be the edge of a lonely moor at dusk, when the fading light plays tricks on the eye, and the wind moving through the heather seems to whisper a name you almost recognize. In these places, the veil between what is and what could be feels as fragile as a spider's thread. The air grows heavy with an unspoken presence. The silence is not empty, but watchful. It is the palpable feeling that you have crossed an invisible threshold, leaving the safety of the human world behind and stepping into the territory of something else. For millennia, those who lived on the edges of these places understood that they were not alone. They shared the land with an unseen nation, a civilization of beings who were not human, but were possessed of a terrifying and powerful intelligence. To survive, one had to learn their laws and respect their boundaries. You did not speak their name aloud, for fear of attracting their attention. Instead, you referred to them with caution, with reverence, with a carefully chosen title that was both a description and a plea. You called them the good neighbors, the people of peace, the gentry, or in the hills of Scotland, simply the wee folk. These were not terms of endearment. They were diplomatic titles, a desperate attempt to appease a power that was ancient, unpredictable, and utterly indifferent to human morality. The word fairy itself, as we know it, now conjures images of gentle sprites with gossamer wings, of benevolent guardians of the garden who dance on dewdrops and grant wishes with a sprinkle of glittering dust. We think of Tinkerbell, but this is a modern taming, a profound and dangerous misunderstanding of the original terror. The stories our ancestors told were not whimsical tales for children. They were warnings. They were field guides to survival in a world saturated with a magic that could bless or blight with equal ease. So, who are these beings, truly? To find the answer, we must part the veil of mist and memory and step into their world. Before the written word, there was memory. Before history, there was myth. And to find the first and most powerful identity of the fair folk, we must travel to the Emerald Isle, to Ireland. The story of the fair folk here is not one of nature spirits born of the earth. It is a history of a great and terrible war, a dynastic struggle, and the story of a race of gods who lost their world. They were called the Tuatha Dé Danann, the people of the goddess Danu. According to the ancient chronicles, they were a race of godlike beings, masters of art, science, magic, and war. They did not rise from the soil of Ireland. They descended upon it, arriving in a great fleet of ships. And upon landing, they burned their vessels, a final, absolute commitment to their new home. They shrouded their arrival in a great, impenetrable mist that lasted for 3 days and 3 nights. With them, they brought the 4 great treasures of their people, artifacts of immense and terrible power. From Phalius, they brought the Stone of Destiny, the Leah File, which would cry out when the true High King of Ireland stood upon it. From Gurias came the invincible Sword of Light, which no enemy could escape once it was drawn. From Phineas, they brought the Spear of Lugh, which thirsted so deeply for blood that its point had to be kept in a cauldron of sleeping draught. And from Marius came the Cauldron of the Dagda, a vessel of plenty from which no company would ever leave hungry. These were not the trinkets of forest sprites. They were the implements of gods. Their dominion was not won easily. They clashed with the Fomorians, a race of grotesque, semi-divine beings who represented the chaotic and destructive power of nature itself. The Tuatha Dé Danann were victorious, securing their golden age. For generations, they ruled Ireland as gods on earth. But their age was destined to end. A new kind of people arrived on the shores of Ireland, the Milesians, the ancestors of the modern Irish people. These were mortal men, but they possessed a new kind of power, a destiny that the ancient magic of the Tuatha Dé Danann could not overcome. A final war was fought, and this time the gods lost. But the Tuatha Dé Danann were not destroyed. They were immortal. In a great council, they agreed to a treaty. They would cede the surface world, the island that could be seen, to humanity. In return, they would take for themselves the other island, the world that existed just beneath the surface, within the ancient burial mounds and the great hollow hills, known as the Seelie. This was their great retreat. They did not vanish. They merely stepped sideways into a parallel dimension. They became the IOC, the people of the mounds. This is the first great identity of the fair folk. They are not cute, winged creatures. They are a fallen pantheon, a race of powerful, intelligent, and proud beings who remember a time when they ruled the world. They are the dispossessed nobility of a magical age, living in exile just beyond the veil of our senses. And they are not gone. They are simply hidden, watching from the hollow hills. The hidden kingdom of the Fae is not a monolith. Within the otherworld, there is a great and ancient schism, a division of power as fundamental as that between day and night, summer and winter. According to the lore of Scotland, they are known as the Seelie and the Unseelie Courts. First, we turn to the light. The Seelie Court is often called the Blessed Court. Its members are the aristocracy of the fairy world, tall, noble, and breathtakingly beautiful, the embodiment of nature in its glory. But do not mistake their beauty for simple goodness. Their benevolence is conditional. The Seelie are not good in the human sense. They are a proud nobility who can be generous to those who show them proper respect, and merciless to those who do not. The nature of their conditional aid is best understood through the story of the fairy midwife. A mortal midwife is summoned on a stormy night by a well-dressed stranger to attend to his wife's labor. She is led into the side of a hill and arrives at a great, brilliantly lit hall. She realizes she is in a fairy mound. She successfully delivers the child. As a reward, the new father gives her a small pot of ointment, instructing her to anoint the baby's eyes. But as she does, a single drop accidentally touches one of her own eyes. In that moment, the world changes. With her anointed eye, she can now see the fairies in their true, dazzling forms. She has been given the second sight. Days later, at a mortal market, she sees the same fairy nobleman stealing goods from a stall. Forgetting herself, she asks after his wife and child. The fairy is stunned. "Which eye do you see me with?" he demands. When she points to the enchanted eye, he strikes it. Her sight of his world is instantly and permanently extinguished. A stark punishment for the simple crime of acknowledging their presence in our world. The Seelie Court may be blessed, but their blessings come with a heavy price. Their light is bright, but it casts its own long and dangerous shadows, and it is to those shadows we now must turn. For every Seelie rider, there is a monstrous hunter of the dark. We now enter the domain of the Unseelie Court. The name itself is a warning, from the old Scots word for unholy. These are the fairies of our deepest fears, the shadow self of the fairy race. They are a malevolent and hostile host, embodying nature in its brutal, unforgiving reality. The howling winter storm, the spreading plague, the predator that stalks the night. Their ranks are filled with the most terrifying figures in folklore. Among them are the Red Caps, grotesque goblins who haunt ruined castles and must keep their hats soaked in the fresh blood of their victims. For if the blood dries, they perish. But the ultimate expression of their terror is the wild hunt. On stormy nights, a spectral hunt tears across the sky, a pack of ghostly hounds at the heels of shrieking horses, ridden by a host of unseelie fairies. To witness the hunt is an omen of war or plague. To be caught in its path is to have your soul ripped from your body and forced to join the ghastly procession for eternity. To interact with the Fae is to step onto a battlefield of ancient laws. The other world is not a lawless place. It is a realm governed by rules far older than any mortal decree. These are not laws of morality, of good and evil. They are the fundamental physics of a magical reality. And to break them is not a sin, it is a catastrophe. Rule number 1, cold iron. To the fair folk, iron is anathema. It burns their ethereal flesh and negates their magic. A horseshoe over a door or a pair of scissors in a cradle were powerful wards. Iron is the metal of human industry, a symbol of humanity's dominion over nature, and they are repulsed by it. Rule number 2, never eat or drink their food. Should you find yourself in their realm, you must never consume a single crumb or a single drop. The food of the other world is an enchantment. To eat it is to bind your soul to their land forever, sealing the path back to your own life. Rule number 3, never give them your true name. In the old world, a name was not a label. It was a piece of your soul. To give your name to one of the Fae is to give them a hook into that soul, granting them a direct and terrible power over you. But perhaps the most terrifying law is the one over which mortals have no control: the treacherous nature of time. The other world does not operate on the same temporal plane as our own. Time there is fluid. What feels like a single night of dancing in a fairy hill can be a century in the mortal world. The legend of Thomas the Rhymer, a real 13th century Scottish poet, illustrates this perfectly. He was led away by the Queen of Elfland into the hollow hills. He believed he had stayed for a mere 3 days. When he was finally allowed to return, he emerged from the hill to discover he had not been gone for 3 days. He had been gone for 7 years. The power of the fair folk is not confined to the wild places. Their influence can reach across the threshold of a home, past the hearth, and into the most sacred and vulnerable of spaces, the cradle. For all the tales of fairy bargains, no aspect of their lore has inspired more primal terror than the myth of the Changeling. The legend is brutally simple. In the dead of night, fairies would steal a healthy human infant. In its place, they would leave one of their own, a sickly, ill-tempered fairy creature, or sometimes an ancient, withered fairy disguised as a baby. The symptoms of a changeling were a checklist of parental anxieties. The creature was perpetually sick. It possessed an insatiable appetite. Its cry was not a human cry, but a piercing, unearthly shriek. And its eyes held a cold, ancient intelligence that was terrifying in the face of an infant. This legend is a dark mirror reflecting the grim realities of a pre-modern world. In an age with no understanding of congenital disorders, developmental disabilities, or infant diseases, the changeling myth provided a supernatural explanation for a child who was different. A baby who failed to thrive was tragically recategorized, not as a sick child, but as a monstrous intruder. This belief, born of fear and grief, led to desperate rituals designed to expose the changeling, rituals involving fire and water. This is not just folklore, it is history. In 1895, in County Tipperary, Ireland, a young, independent woman named Bridget Cleary fell ill with what was likely pneumonia or bronchitis. As her condition worsened, her husband, Michael Cleary, and her extended family became consumed by a terrible suspicion. This was not Bridget. The real Bridget had been taken by the fairies, and this creature in her bed was a changeling. What followed was a week of escalating horror. Michael and Bridget's relatives subjected her to brutal folk rituals, holding her over the fire, demanding she reveal her true name. Her terrified pleas that she was his wife were dismissed as the cunning lies of the changeling. The ordeal reached its ghastly conclusion on the night of March 15th. In a final desperate act of madness, Michael Cleary, convinced the fairy would flee its vessel if confronted with fire, doused his wife in lamp oil, and set her ablaze. Bridget Cleary was burned to death in her own home. The subsequent trial shocked the world. Michael Cleary was convicted of manslaughter, not murder. The court acknowledged that he had acted out of a genuine, if terribly misguided, belief. The case of Bridget Cleary is a haunting testament to the power of folklore. It proves that these beliefs were not just stories. They were real enough to turn a family's love into a fatal weapon. So what happened? How did this terrifying, ancient power fade from the world? As Europe entered the Age of Reason, the belief in a literal other world was in retreat. But on the fringes, in the highlands of Scotland, one man made a final attempt to map the unseen kingdom. His name was Robert Kirk, an ordained minister and the seventh son in his family, a detail that marked him as having the second sight. Around 1691, he completed a dangerous manuscript, The Secret Commonwealth of Elves, Fauns, and Fairies. This was not a book of fairy tales. It was a scientific treatise, a field report on their society, biology, and politics. He was a cartographer, drawing a map of a world he believed to be as real as his own. To map a secret kingdom is to betray its secrets. In May 1692, shortly after completing his book, Robert Kirk took his customary walk on the Fairy Hill overlooking his village. He never returned. His body was found lying on the hill. The official cause of death was apoplexy. But the locals knew better. They whispered that the fairies, in their fury, had stolen his soul, making him a prisoner in their realm forever. Robert Kirk was the last scholar of the secret commonwealth. After him, the door seemed to close. The Industrial Revolution finished the job. Nature was no longer a powerful, sentient entity to be feared. It was a resource to be exploited. The fairies of old were too dangerous for the sentimental tastes of the Victorian era. And so, they were demoted. They were tamed. The tall, aristocratic, terrifying Unseelie were shrunk down. They were given the delicate, insect-like wings of butterflies, a feature almost entirely absent from ancient folklore. Nowhere is this taming more complete than in J.M. Barrie's creation of Tinkerbell. Her very existence is powered not by primordial magic, but by the belief of children. The monster that could steal your soul had become a creature whose soul you could save with a round of applause. The world was so desperate for wonder that it was willing to accept a hoax. The Cottingley fairies, cardboard cutouts held up by hatpins, were championed by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes, as proof that magic was real. And so we return to the threshold. We have seen the fair folk tamed, shrunk, and placed in the pages of children's books. But why do they remain? Why does the whisper of their name still raise the hair on our arms? Perhaps it is because the story of the fair folk was never truly about them. It was always a story about us. It is a vast, complex metaphor for humanity's relationship with the one thing we have always sought to control and have never truly understood: the natural world. The Fae, in their original form, are the soul of the wilderness made manifest. They are the personification of a world that is not built for us and does not care for our laws. The duality of the two courts is the duality of nature itself. The Seelie Court is the sun that warms the fields, the beauty of a wild landscape. The Unseelie Court is the flash flood that scours the valley, the winter blight that brings famine. The predator in the dark. They are not good and evil. They are two faces of a single, primordial, amoral power. The retreat of the IOC into the hollow hills is the story of the wilderness itself, retreating from the iron and smoke of human industry. The old laws were never superstitions. They were ecological warnings. The taboo of cold iron is a warning against the arrogance of industry. The peril of a fairy bargain is a caution against taking more from the land than it is willing to give. We, in our modern world, tamed the fairies in our stories because we believed we had tamed nature itself. We made them small and harmless because we wanted to believe the wilderness was no longer a threat. We put wings on them and placed them in our gardens because we convinced ourselves the wild world was now our private park. We stopped fearing them because we stopped fearing the dark woods. But the wilderness remembers. The old world has not vanished. It is merely sleeping. And perhaps the true horror of the fairy myth is not that they might be real, but that we, in our modern arrogance, have forgotten the old laws. We have forgotten the respect. We have forgotten the fear. We have built our bright, noisy world on the very borders of their silent, ancient kingdom, and we have forgotten that a border can be crossed from both sides.